and welcome to Dungeons and Drama Nerds, a podcast exploring the intersection of theater and tabletop role-playing games. I'm here with Nick.
Hey, everybody.
And ensemble member Chris Diercksen.
Oh, well, hello.
Today, we're going to talk about different approaches to character creation across TTRPG systems and what those different character creation processes and different levels of customizability afford in terms of player experiences. Our sort of central question for this episode is, how does the character creation process feed into the broader goals for storytelling and player experience in a tabletop role-playing game? What do we need to know about them at the outset in order to play out a story? What parts of these player characters are necessary to define? How does that vary across system? In different systems, what does it mean for the characters to be mechanically distinct from one another? How important is that? All of those things. Those are sort of our big pile of questions.
For me, the sort of distillation of this is, what role does player character as avatar for the player fulfill the player enjoyment of the game?
Yeah.
Right? Like, what does the game want? How does the game want you to think of your character?
Yeah.
Relative to the rest.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I do think games take very different stances on this. I'm trying to remember the technical definition of avatar because I have a vague memory that I wrote something once for myself about how avatar and character and something else are all different. But I'm not remembering it right now, so I'll try to remember it while we're talking.
Yeah, I just think about it sort of like a projection of self, right? It's sort of like the skin of a projection of a self.
Yeah.
You know? I think of like Half-Life. I think of like the old, World of Warcraft is a great example. Like, these are customized characters that a player creates for themselves to exist within a world.
Yes, and I just remembered / managed to find my old writing. The reason I think this is maybe going down a rabbit hole we don't want to go down, so we don't have to dig into it, but the notion of avatar in video game studies implies to me a little bit more of a distanced relationship than you have with a role-playing game character, typically with a tabletop role-playing game character, because because you never see the character from a literally outside perspective, and because you're constantly co-creating it in a way that you don't in many video games.
Sure.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
This is like I said, maybe a rabbit hole we don't need to go down, and maybe me being very semantic about the word avatar. So
no, it is, but I think it's also look. I think for our purposes, the simplest version example of Avatar is they made a movie called Avatar in which a person gets warged into another body, and so that he can exist on that planet. Therefore, that is his avatar. And then at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, he becomes that avatar.
Well, and you have more agency, I think, in a TTRPG over what your character wants and does. In a video game, it is kind of important that someone has decided in advance what you're trying to do.
Sure, I think we'll talk about this later. But when we talk about sort of J Dragon's awesome expressionist games conversation, but. I'm right now playing through, really for the first time, but certainly for the first time as an adult, Final Fantasy X, in which you play a character who has a lot of personality, and does a lot of things that I'm like, wow, okay, this is a petulant character. This is a character with perspective, versus Link in Zelda, who is a Lego brick. Who other people, he never speaks, right? Mm-hmm. So, those are two avatars that you, the player, are thrust into, and they have different ways of engaging with the world. And the game defines certain things, either defines more than otherwise in Final Fantasy, versus, Cloud in Final Fantasy VII has opinions, versus Link, who is just do good, save princess, right? Anyway.
Yeah. I think maybe the more productive way I can phrase what's rattling around in my head, and that we should maybe save for later, is a question of, in this character creation process that we're going to explore, is what you end up with an avatar and a character and how much of that is actually impacted by the game, or is what you end up with like a role.
Well phrased. Yes.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Nick, what are some elements that are necessary in a character creation system? In other words, like, what are some common elements of different systems that we've looked at that, like, you have to that must be in order to create a character for a tabletop role playing game?
Yeah, well, we scribbled some down here, like, potentially ability scores / the way one makes moves in a game. But I think what it really comes down to, and we'll talk about the details of this. Okay, so my hot take to answer the question I just posed is these are role playing games, not character playing games, and the thing that the game actually gives you is a role, which means that what is strictly speaking necessary in a character creation process, I think ends up being how does your character interact with both the world and the game, which is sometimes the same thing and sometimes not.
Sure. Can I pull it back? I might even pull it back even further. In that, essentially, the one of the things that is unifying here is within role playing games is there is an element of sort of like there's an external framework upon which your character exists that you as a player rely on, that it's different from you as a person. Right? When we talk about ability scores, I may be a pretty charismatic person in real life, but if I have a low charisma score in Dungeons and Dragons, if my character has a low charisma score in Dungeons and Dragons, then I am operating at a penalty to my natural abilities, right? And for a purpose. And that I think is the sort of like, even if you look at super rules like games like Lasers and Feelings, where you have a D6 and it's a binary field of like every decision is rolled on either lasers or feelings, and you are good at one or the other, right? Or oh dang, Bigfoot stole my car with my friend's birthday present inside, which we played, which is the same system, right? Like even within that, like okay, I'm better at lasers, I'm better at feelings, but like my character is good at lasers, and that is the sort of like step that it takes.
Yeah, I think that does seem like the long and short of it.
Nice.
Like, not to be glib about it, but like what you need for a character creation process is like to have a character with which you can play the game.
Yeah.
At the end.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. And I think we will find that the actual specifics of that process are actually largely like about the intended experience of what the game is trying to have you have.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what
how do they want you to be a character?
Yeah. So what we're gonna do next is we're gonna do a big old survey of what I would posit are like 4 major frameworks for character creation, and I wouldn't say that there are examples that don't fall out of one of these 4 buckets, but I think these are the 4 kind of very common styles, presented in no particular order. The first one being the sort of playbook style, common to Powered by the Apocalypse and Belonging Outside Belonging games. These are playbooks with pre-built sort of story arcs or internal conflicts or some sort of like emotional journey that your character is going to undergo. These are limited in their customizability. There are a bunch of sort of pre-written moves often that you can choose from, or you can choose the order in which you get them. These are often systems that don't have a ton of wiggle room in terms of like, at most you're going to have a +3 versus a +1 in a given skill. So there's not a big swing because it's a 2d6 system more often than not. In these systems, the characters are super, super different from each other, and you cannot have 2 of the same playbook in your adventuring party because that would be strange and redundant. The example that I have that I am perhaps most familiar with is Thirsty Sword Lesbians, which is funny because Apocalypse World I think was one of the progenitors of this style, but whatever. Thirsty Sword Lesbians gives playbooks that sort of define your character's relation to the world and to other people. It's really about like what is your central emotional conflict. For example, the Devoted playbook, the text in the playbook in the handbook says the Devoted is a selfless protector committed to a person or a cause. Their central conflict lies in pitting this devotion against self-care.
Remind me what your when you played on the podcast, what your playbook was?
I was the spooky witch who is like ostracized from the world because they have this relation to like they're scary. Although in my case, Adelaide was not really scary so much as she just had autism.
Real stretch there, Percy.
I know. Autism and loves trains, crazy. But so you also have some playbooks in Thirsty Sword Lesbians, like The Infamous, which is somebody who has a villainous past and is trying to atone and get forgiveness, like that kind of thing.
Have that one too.
Yeah.
Mieko? Did Mieko play that?
Mieko did play that one.
Yes, that's right.
So yeah, so you have this like emotional conflict that you're playing, this like desire or this thing that you're butting up against with how the world perceives you, that makes it difficult to get what you want. So that's sort of what you're choosing when you choose one of these playbooks. And you have sort of a story arc that leads you towards, where if you're playing a spooky witch, you want acceptance. And that's what you're trying to get through gameplay. Some permutations of this are like Raina Jadi's Arhant, which is a belonging outside belonging game, which we have also played on the pod. Those playbooks are defined sort of by your relation to how you feel about your own death and how you feel about being a ghost, how you feel about not moving beyond this sort of particular kind of afterlife. It has really specific character prompts, but it is not prescriptive in them because, like, who knows what certain of these character prompts mean. Like, one of the name options for the Betrayed is a short and sharp name, an old and forgotten name. I don't know what that means necessarily. You decide. So belonging outside belonging games are very much giving you stuff to work with, but it's a little bit more customizable, I would argue, in terms of like the designer's not saying what it means. They don't have an idea in mind.
But you do have to pick from these certain things.
And those are extremely specific things as well. Like you're choosing an extremely, extremely specific type of character to be. You are a cat, or you are a ghost that is haunting a doll, or you are somebody who went to the afterlife and came back.
And that not to jump ahead, but just like you, as you're saying this, I'm like, right, playbooks generally seem that they're characteristics of a tightly focused game that therefore knows exactly what the player characters are going to be interacting with.
Yeah.
Is like, this game knows what it's talking about.
Yeah, and it has
you are there for that.
Yeah, you're showing up saying, I really want to be one of these 6 ghosts haunting a house.
For this purpose that the game has aligned us towards.
Yeah, and you might have an idea in mind, but you're not coming in saying, I'm playing a sneaky archer archetype, because the game already it is like one step away from pre-generated characters, I would argue.
Right. Yeah.
Yes. Cool.
I feel like a lot of playbooks also can be read as answers to a particular question that the game asks of the characters. Like, what is your relationship to your death, or what is your relationship to your companions? Or we had a note here to mention Blades in the Dark and Fortune in the Dark games generally also have playbooks that are a little bit of a like spin on the formula relative to the other two traditions, because they tend to be less concerned about like interiority and the emotional life of your character, and more with the sort of externalities of like, in Blades in the Dark, I would say like, how do you earn your keep?
The given circumstances of the world.
Right. And what is your role in the party, really?
In your
crew.
Like,
and we're going to talk. We're for sure. At least I'm for sure going to talk about the party creation as sort of like intentional party creation versus a game where it doesn't really necessarily care about if you're working together or not. You know what I mean? That's a little more selfish.
In that vein, I would say playbook style games like Thirsty Sword Lesbians and Arhant, the party comp does not matter at all.
Yeah.
Because it is actually just about like what are the emotional lives of these characters and how do they...
Or arguably, it does matter in that they do pretty much all have that rule of you can't double up.
That's true.
Yeah, no.
You can have two fighters in a party.
I just mean like, I just mean like like how in Stillfleet you have to have a banshee or one will be assigned to you.
Sure.
Like, you don't have to have a scoundrel.
They don't matter in the same way, although maybe the way is kind of analogous to the way party.
Well, yeah. How they matter is that it matters that you are unique within your party.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Speaking of D&D, since we sort of like verged in that direction.
No, it's good. This is a great segue.
Yeah, like this is. D&D is our kind of bucket 2. I personally think of this as the Lego block, like character creation method, which is where you get basically building blocks that the game gives you that each give you some powers or numbers or information somehow, and then you get to staple them together in ways that seem fun and exciting to you. So in Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, this would be your race, your class, and I guess your background, although that never really feels very important in the 5th edition games I've played.
I would argue subclass is more important than background within D&D.
Right, yes, subclass you get at 3rd level because Wizards of the Coast hates having fun. But these different... The character creation process here is functionally like stapling very broad, prearranged bits together to create a character that is not, to differing degrees, is not really unique in that there are conceivably other elf fighters, but they give you a sort of broad archetypal starting point to work from. I will say, one thing I find interesting about this is that in a lot of these games anyway, I'll say like certainly in my experience, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, those similar like D20 fantasy games, the background is largely like vestigial. I feel like this is true to different extents, but it's interesting to me that the background is a thing that we sort of actively don't care about that much, because what the game is interested in is what you do now that you are an adventurer. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I was going to say that I am always curious about is I think this depends on the person, but I have a suspicion that this approach is easier for many people who are new to these games, and especially people who don't come from like other highly like creative practices than systems where you are asked to like generate a whole character by yourself. As I've put it to people before, I'm like, it's relatively speaking much more difficult to be like, okay, here's my character. She's a doctor who moved from Ghana to Baltimore for medical school, and she fell in love with a woman here, so she stayed in the U.S. They have 2 cats. They live in this neighborhood. That's much harder than being like, I'm a dwarf who hits things with a hammer. It's like an accessible starting point, I think.
What I have learned, at least from playing this game, you've got a background which is sort of like a very loose sort of like justification for why you are here now as an adventurer. In D&D anyway, right? Like, I was a noble, and like now I have traits and ideals and bonds and flaws and personality, and those are things that like I use to justify my existence in this space, in this dungeon with my friends. Yeah. Right? Like, and that's fine. But over the course of the game, the like thing that ends up happening is people start tying in and learning about their backstory by way of moving forward and learning about what is important to their character by understanding what was important to their character over time. It's like this interesting thing when it's done, at least when I've had like really successful experiences of this. It's like the farther I go forward, the more I understand where I came from, which I think is an interesting way of approaching it. But though it is not necessarily necessary, it's just sort of, because again, the game doesn't like make that happen. I think that's just storytelling.
Yeah, and I was just thinking, in some ways, that character creation process can be summed up at, like, every character can be summed up as, I was blank and now I kill things.
A little bit in that game, yeah.
Well, and you kind of don't have to have a backstory. Like, it's nice. It's a nice to have. It could make the game more engaging for you, but like, it is not mechanically necessary in the way that it is in some other games.
And ultimately, what we're talking about is what I am talking about, I guess, is how I run my games.
Yeah.
Right. And I run my games that way, but that is not the way to run Dungeons and Dragons, and that, or any game like that. And that in and of itself is sort of the primary characteristic of a game like this is, here are tools, do what you want.
Yeah.
Right.
But you want Chris to... I agree with that, but I also want to say you had a couple of examples of games that kind of trouble that paradigm, because I do think that like very present-focused, here are tools, do what you want approach is common in a lot of games. But did you want to talk about Stillfleet and Daggerheart a little bit?
Absolutely.
Which are sort of twists?
They are twists in this, and I think they're twists in very different ways. Stillfleet, which we're currently, hopefully you're currently listening to that campaign, it's very interesting because the world is very defined in that game, right? You work for the Co, whether you like it or not, and the game assumes you will not. Right? You will not like working for the Co. If you do like working for the Co, then at a certain point you are a sociopath. Right? But like within the character creation of it, every kind of character that you can create in this game is supposed to strictly adhere to a certain idea of how a class relates to the benevolent company. Right? How it relates to this corporate overlord for which you are an employee, and then you go out and it does sort of like always, it is in and itself an adversarial system that way, because it asks the GM to be a representative of the Co, and like at a certain point there's no way, even if you were to go outside of the lore, it's really hard to play that game without playing within the lore that the game represents, right? And I think that's interesting. So as an example, I play a Tremulant in this campaign, and a Tremulant is a class that is specific to an ancestry. You must play a Terran, you must play a human, and very specifically, you must play a Terran who was kidnapped and imprisoned and then tortured into understanding hell sciences to work on behalf of the company, right? We do a lot in our campaign. We do a lot of rule breaking with our characters. I mean, like John playing Private Taps it breaks the rules of the game, and in many ways, I would say that Kory playing Peanut is sort of fail maxing this character in a lot of ways as well, right? Like the things that the character that the character class requires to be successful are things that Kory very specifically decided to make their stats be unsuccessful at, right? And like, so there's a lot of stuff going on in our campaign that way. But like ultimately, this game has a clear idea of a pretty rigid idea of who you should be within this game, relative to the world. Does that make sense? Am I making sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is, again, a departure from like, with some exceptions, Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, that kind of thing, like you said before, they tend to take the approach of like, these are tools, do with them what you will. So they do tend to be divorced from like a fighter can be anything from like guy who picked up a sword to a knight who has sworn an oath to like drunken dude who punches people. Like, you know, they do not, they are not tied to like a social location and a world in the way that in Stillfleet and in some other, I would say usually smaller, more like indie games, classes or whatever, you know, jobs, whatever term they use for that, are like really specific.
Yeah, I think the thing with Stillfleet that's very interesting that it imposes upon the character creation. It's something that it imposes upon the game itself, which is it imposes an adversary.
Yes.
It makes the big bad is also you as a character are fully dependent on the big bad.
Yeah.
You must, which is to say capitalism. You, in order to exist and advance in this world, you must engage with the thing you do not like. And the character classes and creation are essentially ways in which to flavor and color that engagement, right? Versus Daggerheart, which is again very Lego bricky, right? You have your ancestries, you have your communities and classes and subclasses and things. But what's interesting relative to that, first of all, I think this to me feels like an evolution in a lot of ways off of D&D and Pathfinder in that capacity, which is to say, unlike in D&D and in ancestry or race, does not have a mechanical benefit or penalty to your baseline stats, right? It's just a feature. It provides a feature that you can use. Same thing goes with the community, which is to say background, where you came from and what that affords you. But the thing that's interesting within class and subclass of these character creation is that is the domain wheel that it uses, which is to say, if you imagine a wheel, a circle, and you have surrounding that circle, you have all of the classes of, you know, you've got your ranger, you've got your fighter, you've got your barbarian, you've got your, you know, you've got your warlock and sorcerer and wizard and so on and so forth, and your druid. But externally to that, there is a separate wheel, which is to say domains, and each class can choose abilities from two domain decks of abilities, and that adjacent to them on that wheel is another class which shares. So if I am a rogue and I can do sneaky things and I can do smarty things, let's say, I might be next to a bard who can do the same smarty things but can't do the sneaky things, versus a fighter which can do the same, or a ranger which can do the same sneaky things but not the same smarty things.
Yeah.
And so there's a shared ability wheel that sort of like surrounds everything, which I think is a super interesting way of engaging in party dynamics. I don't know if that rings true to either of you.
No, it definitely erodes some of the like exceptionalism that I think defines a lot of these games, where it's like you are uniquely powerful in this way, even if you could have two fighters in a party who are mechanically distinct because they're different subclasses or whatever. Like, I think there's like an acknowledgement of overlap in abilities that feels like it has adventurers are somewhat less exceptional in a way that feels truer, I guess, is maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. No, I agree.
To me, I'm trying to figure out if this thought is related to like how I think of characters, or if this is more of a like game designer-y thought.
Sure.
It's a very exciting mechanical system to me in terms of game design, because it opens up so many obvious and fun like homebrew and game design potential. You know, like making a class for Daggerheart, you can do a lot of the heavy lifting by just being like, okay, what are two domains that haven't been paired together yet that seem fun?
Totally. Yes. How do you get that? That's a really interesting thing. Yes.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about that.
Yeah. So, but I was going to say, I don't know. Similarly, to me, I guess in terms of character creation, and I think you mentioned, Chris, you want to talk about this later, but there's also the question of who your character is in the party. And so the domain sharing gives you a little bit of what people sometimes call niche protection, where even though you're not unique in the way that you are in, say, Apocalypse World, where they're like, if you're the Gunlugger playbook, you are literally the Gunlugger in the world. But you still know whether, anyone else, you know how much of your kit anyone else has access to. It reminds me a lot of God's Perfect 4th edition of Dungeons and Dragons, which had a sort of similar modular design. They had power sources, so there was arcane, primal, psychic, that kind of thing, which gave you kind of flavor, and then roles in the party. So, you could have, it was a similar kind of you can have an arcane controller and a, martial defender, and, that gives you a bunch of different, swappable bits that compose characters.
I think the thing that's interesting with this, relative to Daggerheart specifically, is it does this, and I think it is very much what you're talking about, which is to say, it is a way in which, like you said, the class is not as necessarily unique in the world, as you said, Percy, and also it does sort of suggest party composition pretty well within a sort of a more rigid way. And then the thing that they do outside of that is they have these experiences and connections that they're asking you to make, which are super, super open and do provide mechanical advantage when you're saying my characters, that's essentially, instead of a background of how you got here, you are defining phrases, right? That you can say, I could be a rogue, and one of my experiences is easy come, easy go. And then in a situation, I could implore the DM, or the GM rather, I would like to gain advantage on this roll because the situation applies to my experience, easy come, easy go. Oh, and I have this sort of this hope currency, which the game uses to allow myself to do that. And those are, as well, connections are things that they suggest you make. They're sort of more connected within other players in your party that you can do in similar ways. Which are super wide open. They give you some ideas of it, but they're make it up. You know what I mean? You've got rigid domain wheel, and then you've got make up how you are unique using these mechanics, which I think is a very interesting, again, an interesting way of being here's how you enjoy this game, right? It's don't worry so much about this stuff, worry about the other thing, and it sort of limits what you need to worry about in a character creation perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Yes?
Yeah.
Did I say it all?
I think you did.
Oh, good. I love it when I say all this great stuff and I leave no room for conversation.
No, we're talking about it later.
We're gonna talk later.
We're gonna move on to other things.
A sort of bridge from Daggerheart into the next sort of bucket that we're going to talk about is the Heroic Chronicle backstory system from the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, which is a D&D supplement book that was created by Matt Mercer and the Critical Role crew. In brief, the Heroic
Who made Daggerheart.
Yeah, yes. In brief, basically, you start with the region that you're from or where you spent a lot of time growing up, and then you either roll for or choose your background, social status, your home settlement, your race, your family size, family relationships. You choose allies and rivals. You roll for fateful moments. You roll for a prophecy. You roll for favorite food, which I think is a funny, incredibly granular thing that you have.
I love that flavor. Literally.
So it's a sort of, I would argue this is sort of a life pathy method of character generation, which is sort of the next bucket that we're going to talk about, is the life path style of character creation. The two major titles in this, the two big examples that you will find, are Traveler, which is a sci-fi RPG, and Burning Wheel, which is a sword and sorcery sort of fantasy RPG that does not hesitate to remind you that it is rooted in one man's perception of Middle Ages history. In Traveler, you start by rolling for your characteristics, which is like akin to ability scores, and a few background skills, and then you engage in multiple 4-year terms of doing your career. So your character will essentially, you pick a career, you roll to see whether you qualify for that career. If you don't, you have to be a drifter or you're drafted into another career. And along the way, as you do these different career terms, you specialize, you roll for events and life events. Like you can roll for whether or not you break up with your girlfriend and decide what that does to your character. You might roll for like a death in your family. There are events and advancements within your career. You might specialize, you might move into a new career. And along the way, you're picking up money and gear and allies and skills and all of these other things. Once you have reached the age that you would like to be as at the start of play, you stop the character creation process. Something that I think is funny is that as you age, you start rolling to see whether or not you are experiencing like physical decline after the age of 34, which is crazy.
34?
34!
This is it? This is my last year before I have to roll for physical decline?
Yeah.
As a 40-year-old, Nick, yeah, it is.
That's
yeah.
The other thing that is sort of notorious about Traveler is that it is like incredibly possible for your character to die during character creation.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah.
This is like famously a Traveler meme.
Yeah, that you can die in character creation because you're rolling for your character's history.
I love that though.
The experiences in the career that you choose very directly correlate to what you're good at, which is is kind of duh, but like the book the book is very specifically like, if you want to be good at combat, you have to do like a risky military career, or else you're not going to be good at combat, because a guy who like works a desk job isn't good at shooting guns.
You're telling me that I'm not good at combat? Me?
I am telling you that you aren't good at combat. I'm so sorry.
Percy having fist fought Chris Diercksen before.
No, I actually don't know who would win, and I don't want to find out.
I do.
We're gonna leave it a mystery. In Burning Wheel, you start at birth. The book said that, I'm gonna quote from the rulebook here. Characters start the game naked and stupid. Literacy is earned through skills. Clothing is purchased with resource points. However, it is up to the player to decide whether or not his character can whistle. That's not a skill. End quote.
Wow.
Which I think that's the vibe of this game.
Wow.
So
of judgmental.
That yes. So you start quite literally at birth. You are born into what is called a character stock. So you're either a dwarf, an elf, a man, or an orc. Those are the only options. And that locks you into a specific choice of what are called life paths in the game that you can choose to do in character creation. So you start with like a concept of what you want to be. You choose a character stock. You have like different what are called settings, which are like groups of life paths, and they lead you into different choices that sort of branch off of your initial choices. You tally up your character's age based on how long they've spent doing their various life paths. You get all these points, skill points and resource points and all these other points and things, and then you spend all of them.
That's a whole game on itself.
It's a whole like, it says in the book that this takes 45 minutes if you're doing it for the first time, and I don't believe that. But
I've also done a recipe. I've also read a recipe. It's like, this takes 25 minutes, and like an hour and a half later, I'm done.
Yeah. The designer calls it essentially a quote-unquote intricate point-by-character creation system. He explicitly discourages min-maxing. The other element of
that's shocking to me, based off of the way that this person has written their book.
Yeah, he does say, I understand why this might be surprising, but I promise you, min-maxing actually makes this a less than fun experience.
These people, I know the type of person who has written this book, and they are all about Again, with the one particular man's idea of the Middle Ages, they tend to, in my experience, they tend to be very into the like role playing of like you are just a guy.
Yeah.
Or whatever, it's like you got to play the hand you're dealt, kind of thing. Not as much as the next bucket, which we'll talk about, but yeah, that doesn't surprise me.
The last thing I'll say about Burning Wheel is that it's sort of like most unique trait aside from these life paths is that like characters are like functionally the same, like you're choosing from the same pool of abilities and skills and stuff. You're distinguished by traits, which are like your characteristics, like your trait. You could have the stinky trait or the booming voice trait. Instincts, which like you have to sort of write out some always or if then statements about your character. So for example, I always draw my sword at the first sign of trouble. I scream for help if I am surprised, are things that you always do reliably. And then beliefs, which are just like a way to try to like guide what your character wants to do or what your character would do in a certain situation. And the GM is encouraged to like actively test your beliefs. Like the game is actually just like putting you in situations where your beliefs are challenged.
This style feels a whole lot like, I know we're going to do hot takes later, but I won't remember this. But this feels like I have done all the work for you.
Yeah.
Kind of game. Which is to say like just okay, sorry, keep going.
No, it is very like all of the thinking has been done, and therefore you can just play, and it's like actually I would argue kind of a non-intuitive system for play. But that's the life path system, which is basically building a character largely randomly, but like you're making choices about the backstory, and the backstory is what gives you those skills and attributes, and all of the stuff that you can do in the game all comes from this like mini game process of generating your character.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but Burning Wheel is not random, right?
No, you are.
You choose. It's basically a branching. Like you choose a life path, which is like a little kind of horizontal diagram entry in the book, and then it says it's like leads, and you pick one of the next like buckets.
Exactly. Yeah. But some other games that use a similar like life pathy system or like generate through backstory is sort of like really the broader bucket that I would call this. Have you sort of roll randomly for like a starting
like Traveler, right?
Yeah, Traveler starts with random rolls.
As opposed to this category.
Yeah, as opposed to number 4, which is completely randomized character generation, in which you are rolling dice randomly in order to determine abilities. You're rolling randomly for an occupation. Typically, you are creating characters that are largely expendable and don't have a lot of thought or concept put into them because you are feeding them into a meat grinder. The game that I'll talk about to like exemplify this is Dungeon Crawl Classics. You are an adventurer, you're looking for gold, you're delving into dungeons. In this game, you start as a level 0 peasant. You only get a class once you survive the first dungeon. So essentially, you roll 3d6 to get your ability scores in order. You roll a d4 for your hit points, you roll a d100 for occupation, which gives you trade goods that you have and your trained weapon. The designer calls this the character creation funnel. So you make 2 to 4 0-level characters using this completely random process, and then the ones that survive the first dungeon become this like motley crew of adventurers who are bonded by this shared experience of being in this first dungeon together.
By shared trauma.
Yeah. And they argue that this eliminates min-max play, but creates instead a sense of attachment to the characters that players end up carrying forward.
Okay.
And the other quote that I'll pull from this is that the DCC RPG takes an anachronistic approach to the concept of codifying game balance by pursuing an even playing field through randomization rather than complexity.
Which I respect, I'll say, from the perspective of like why we play games with dice as opposed to just play, as opposed to just like improv.
Yeah, but this is also, you're not making a character with like, you might develop motivations and goals and beliefs and like character attributes over time, but the character creation process is very functional and has no sort of input from you. Some other systems that use elements of this are the Troika system, which is like wild for a lot of reasons, and we won't get into it because we don't have time. To some extent, listen to Skip Bash. To some extent, Call of Cthulhu is like this as well. Although there are some choices that you're making, but Call of Cthulhu, at least, like, similarly is occupation driven, and you start by rolling random attribute. You start by rolling for your stats in order, as opposed to, although I'm sure some people homebrew, like, roll all of your things and then assign them to what you want to be good at.
Yeah, it's easy to homebrew.
But the game wants you to play it this way.
Yeah, the game wants you to say, okay, the dice said that I'm really good at I can't think of any Call of Cthulhu ability because I left my brain as soon as we recorded that Skip Bash. The dice want me to be really strong, so I'm gonna go all in on being strong.
Brawn.
Yes.
I think.
Yes.
Yeah, I will say about randomized characters, a few thoughts. Number one is that you can do this with a lot of games, and sometimes it's kind of fun. But I think there's two things one thing that's true, and then one thing that is, like, debatably true. The thing that's true that I've observed playing games like this, like Shadow Dark is the one I've played a couple of times, is that it is actually sneakily a very good system for, like Percy said, games where you're going to be playing some kind of meat grinder, because your relationship to the character and to the idea of the character dying is very different, because these are not characters that you have forward, like, planned or imagined. And also they tend to be very efficient at generating characters. So there is, when your character dies in, like, Pathfinder or D&D, it kind of sucks, A, because you're attached to them, and B, because it takes a long fucking time to make a character, relatively speaking. And when the character is just, like, roll 3 dice 6 times, write down the numbers, and then, like, grab 3 things off a list of starting gear, it is very easy to, like, recover from character death, so to speak. The other thing, and this is the one where I'm like, I don't know if this is true, but it feels common enough that a common enough perspective that I'll name it, since I don't think any of us in this call are really, like, OSR people. But one of the tenets of the, like, old school Revolution gameplay style that people argue for this from is that, like Percy said, it avoids min-maxing, and in some ways people also suggest that it rewards player ingenuity rather than character skill. So, if you are the theory, and I don't know how much I believe this is true, but the claim is that, if your character is exploring a room with a trap in it, the game depends more on the player saying, okay, I am gonna go investigate this, like, area of the room, than on just, like, okay, I make a perception check, roll, die, look, and because I'm good at perception, that's why I do it. I see how.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm
having flashbacks to the Tomb of Horrors module.
Yeah.
What's that?
I'm having flashbacks to running Tomb of Horrors, where it was very much like, if the player tries to pull the brown velvet curtain off the wall, it's actually brown mold, and it envelops them.
Well, and that is, I was going to say, certainly not a play style for everyone. And again, I have my suspicions. I'm dubious of how much people... Yeah. Not totally dubious, but I don't know that I don't know that the game actually provides tools to help you play in that way so much as just doesn't provide the tools to do the other thing.
Yeah, because the thing that's challenging there is it also needs... Look, you also need to provide tools to the game master to communicate that information to... and that communication is inherent to most, if not all, of these games that we're talking about.
Exactly.
I mean, my hot take is I don't think it's fun to sit in a group with my friends and be like, I investigate the second 5-foot stretch of wall.
Well,
I investigate the third 5-foot stretch of wall.
Yeah, the trapped room is a classic example, but the notion is that there's some phrase they use, I don't remember what it is though. The notion is that if the obvious answers are not on your character sheet because your character sheet is randomized, then you engage more directly with everything. If I'm a fighter in D&D, the most straightforward solution to most problems is to fight
hitting
it.
something. Yeah. Which is to say, the most straightforward solution that you will potentially be successful at. But if you were in a Regency campaign as a fighter, then you are at a disadvantage because you're trying to. Then you should have charisma skills.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so then your ability to maneuver the narrative towards using your skills that you're good at is player ingenuity. Right?
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's the theory.
Yeah. Well, okay. I think, okay. We're getting in the weeds.
I have a separate thought, which is that I'm thinking about genre, because it seems to me that playbook style games tend to be incredibly specific in their genre and storytelling, whereas like we have examples from all across different genres in the other sections.
We'll talk more about genre though.
I guess I don't know how many completely randomized games there are, period, and I think like it needs to be some kind of dungeon crawler functionally.
Yeah. Well, but ultimately what we're talking about, okay, so I think it's interesting to think about this in the sense that like adventure is a genre in many ways. It's also sort of like a modality, right, of storytelling, but which is to say it's a modality of audience experience of story, which is right, like I you know, what's going to happen of it all. And so like you look at something like a Lego brick category that we've got, which doesn't really necessarily provide you with too much, with the exception perhaps of Stillfleet. But even Stillfleet is just like there's an adversary that you need to engage with. The what's going to happen of it all is sort of like inherent to the open-endedness of the game. It sort of like assumes that you will be a hero in Dungeons and Dragons, right? And any deviation from that is in some ways a subversion of that sort of like storytelling trope, storytelling modality, which you can go into. The villains are the heroes of their own story, blah 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 blah, right? Versus like the genre stuff that you're talking about, which, you know, when I think about genre, I think mystery provides much more. There's a lot of mystery relative to genre, right? Noir is a genre, and it's very often a detective, right? And how do we enjoy these stories, but through discovery and discovering what was always there in the first place, that kind of thing. And I think that is a much more rigid. What are we investigating? Allows for the game to. Am I making any sense to you both in this as we're sort of, you know, breaking stuff up?
Yeah, I think so.
I think in playbook style games, it is, while it like there is an incredible specificity to who you're playing, with limited customizability. I think it is also true that like the game experience is more about like experiencing the world, or like coming to understand the world,
sure.
Rather than, because like I'm thinking about, and I also think that like the playbook style games are not married to being like adventure games. Like you are not necessarily an adventurer.
Yes.
Like in Monster Hearts,
Or
you're fucking chilling. Wander Home, you're chilling.
Wander Home especially.
Famously, you're chilling. Monster Hearts, you're trying to get laid.
I would argue that is an adventure, though.
I think I have a proposal here that is maybe me accidentally dragging in this article I've been working on into this, but I hope it's a real
That's fine.
thing,
That's
which
fine.
Is that I have a theory that these are less about differences in genre in terms of like narrative genres, and the more profound difference, and the one that's more interesting and sometimes kind of problematic, is it's like social or not social model of like relationship between self and world.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's playbook games are about in a sort of playbook games usually, not always, but are usually about like kind of interbeing social webs, particularly empowered by the apocalypse, but I think not only. Um, the Lego brick ones are very like, again, neoliberal. It's like you are a group of experts who all bring different technical skills to this problem, and your background is like your history is not important except as a resource. Mm-hmm. The life path ones. This was my real hot take that now I'm cogitating on. The life path ones. It's interesting to me that Traveler is sort of famously, I think, the first game to do that historically, like the first edition of Traveler way back in the 80s, so. Because there's a trading of the biological determinism of like original Dungeons and Dragons that's also present in the kind of fully randomized ones, which are a paradigm of like you are functionally born with certain abilities and you play the hand that you're dealt. Mm-hmm. Traveler and other life path ones trade out that biological determinism for a sort of sociological determinism of, like because you have gone through these stages in life, your results are X, Y, and Z. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It does.
And I think that's why for me the life path ones feel germane to. We alluded earlier to Jay Dragon's Expressionist Games Manifesto. It's on Medium if you read that, but she talks a lot in that piece of writing about like tensions between the social rules of the world the game is set in and the game's actual mechanics. And so that is that kind of sociological like this is your place in the world, which determines what your % chance of succeeding at shoot gun is.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It feels to me like that is some of that tension. Am I crazy? Am I reading Jay correctly?
I also think she's pointing in that article to, she uses the term fruitful void, which is a Forge, like Vincent and McKay Baker term. Which I'll like briefly gloss. It is something that is not explicitly accounted for in the rules, but the game is inviting you to think about, which kind of leads us to fill in a space ourselves. It's a question without an answer that is imposed by the text, or it's not a question that is explicitly asked in the text often. And I think she's pointing at the idea that like the rules of character creation can simulate the character's social reality or define their relation to the world, either in like a socioeconomic sense, like in a life path system, which is sort of saying here are the circumstances in which you lived your life and the things that shaped you. But the rules can never tell you your character's internal life. The rules can never tell you what your character thinks and feels. That is like only something that you, the player, can provide, perhaps shaped by I'm a dwarven bard who was raised in a monastery.
I think that's the crux of this exercise, though, of tabletop games in general, right? Essentially, oh man, I don't know if this is a fully formed thought, but we're gonna go.
Hell yeah.
Try it. But just the idea that like, in life, you have given circumstances, and every day we all make choices that align with the sort of like sociological expectations of people as we perceive them to be, right? Which is to say the path of least resistance oftentimes, do we resist or do we, capitulate? And like relative to all of these games, there are systems in which that define the circumstances and how your character will, those pressures your character will experience by existing in that circumstance. Mm-hmm. And that there's a certain element of like here is how you are best equipped to survive within those circumstances. But as you say, nobody can tell you how you will feel. And that exploration and discovery is one of self-discovery as a person. And that in and of itself is why we get hooked on these games. Is because we go, oh, given these circumstances, this is the kind of person I would be.
And that's what I think is really successful about Stillfleet, is that there's an alignment because of the relationship to the code that is kind of imposed upon you by the game. You and your character, like there is, I think, a kinship that takes place as you the player, because we the player, like, you know from the beginning the code is bad, and I think there is something really interesting about the way that you're incentivized to find routes for your character to start having that same questioning. And I think you are like, I haven't played Stillfleet, but I think it would be fun for me as a player to think about, like, oh, what is a way for me to earn this character turning their back on the co? Because I think, like, I am incentivized to play into that dissonance in a way that I think is really interesting.
Well, and I don't know where we're at in the campaign when this airs, but I will say that I'm sure we are at a certain point, which is to say the point where we have gone back. We can cut this if you have to. The point where we went back to the co, which allowed us to level up.
Yes,
right?
Yeah, we're past the first venture for sure.
But like, like that is a thing that I know Ben did not anticipate us doing, and as the GM, and like by him not anticipating that we were going to do that, it says how he was expecting us to operate, and how he set us up to do that, and how much actual like capitulation to the co he was expecting us to do versus just to rebel right away. Right? And I think that's an interesting sort of like way of thinking about the game, right? Like it's asking us to participate in a system we detest for personal gain. You know,
and it gives you no other mechanical. It gives you no mechanical support to do anything else.
You can't do anything else. You will just be weak if you do not do it.
Yet the setup of it pushes you to do something.
Yeah, and so it forces you as a player, as the person who played, it forces you as a player to constantly be asking yourself, what will I give? Right? What of my morals will I betray for personal, like, how far will I go to get what I want?
Yeah, you know? Which I think produces a really generative and interesting player experience that accomplishes what Wythe and the Stillfleet Studio are trying to do, which is like to make a leftist TTRPG, and we'll talk about this in a later commentary episode. But to like do the very like classic sci-fi, like I am experiencing this thing in this fictional world that is inviting me to think about the ways that I myself in real life am complicit in systems that I know to be harmful because I have to survive.
That's the word, yeah.
Well, because that's what it is, right? Like,
yes.
If you live on Spindle, where the fuck else are you gonna go?
Yeah.
So I think, like, that is an example of a game that I think is actually really inspiring and interesting. The mechanics are informing the fruitful void of what your character's internal life is, but it is not. It's not doing anything but creating cognitive dissonance that is then, I think, generative.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I was going to say, and that's something not all character creation does. One of the questions we had here is like, which of these systems afford you the chance to like bring a character concept in versus letting the concept sort of emerge? And like, you certainly can come in with a character concept in Stillfleet, but it's going to be heavily colored by what the game is, as opposed to the like
I'll tell you, I tried. Geshra really is an attempt. I really was like, I went into that game talking about how I wanted to play a healer, and I didn't want to play a high charisma character. Mm-hmm. I didn't want to be a de facto leader of a group. For like sort of like, because I often end up being, because I am that in life. That's just sort of like what I end up doing a lot of times.
This also happened at a recent Great British Bake Off themed Daggerheart session that I ran that Chris was in, where
I really wasn't. I was like really like, but everyone was like, well, and I'm like,
Chris made the character choice to be really excited about baking, and everyone was like, great, you're in charge of the baking.
And I was like, I am the least equipped to do this.
Anyway,
but the point of it is like, it was really hard. I was like, oh, I'm going to play a peer. I'm going to be a peer because peers are the healers. They're the doctors, so to speak. But they're also like the mechanics of what it requires you to be. I was like, oh, I'm not interested in being that. I don't want to do that. Because it sort of like goes against my sort of like a lot of the other elements of it. I don't remember what exactly stopped me from being it, but I thought about being a Gelasti peer, which is the classic peer, the pacifist doctor. But the specific relationship to the I was like, oh, it's too nice. It's too chummy with the for me to sort of like allow for myself as a person to do. And so I chose to be a fucking Tremulant who absolutely hated the but I'm just going to make this Tremulant a healer. And then you all will see just how effective Geshra is in any situation, which is to say, hardly. Hardly effective. Except for when he absolutely is. So, like, that's... So, anyway, it's just a very interesting thing to do. Anyway, now I'm just talking about myself.
No, as you should. I think something that I've observed about all of these is that some of these character creation systems seem really invested in allowing you to make a real person, or simulating the experience of human, as Burning Wheel says, mannish or orcish or dwarvish or elven life.
Love that they went with mannish.
I'm so not interested. I'm so not interested.
They couldn't bring themselves to use the word human at all in the text.
No.
Anywhere.
Mannish.
So they were like, what do we call the culture of capital M men? Mannish culture. I read that and I was like, what the fuck?
But I think there's an old design paradigm of simulationism, gameism, and narrativism, which are like three ways that one enjoys a game. You play a game because you're trying to simulate what it would be like to fight in the Battle of Waterloo. You're trying to be as close to the experience you're simulating as possible.
Sure.
You
trying to get it right.
Yeah, you really like playing with game mechanics. You really want to do Thaco and roll on a bunch of tables and do a lot of math.
Thaco's required.
No, Thaco is part. That's what I say. And then narrativism, which is like I really want to experience a story.
Yeah.
Playbook style character creation 1000% is like, oh, what story is most appealing to me? Because there are, having played Arhant, there are playbooks in there that I would never play, that I don't want to be betrayed, which is what Kory played as Jules. I really don't want to play a character whose emotional arc and whose relation to the world is defined by their anger. I don't really want to play a doll because I have a lot of real life experience about being in a body that I don't want to have. And that's actually not fun for me, right? But I think because there's less modularity, it's also really clear what you should and shouldn't choose.
Yeah.
And in my experience of playing various Powered by the Apocalypse playbook style games, it's very much like, oh, which of these things is most appealing to me, and let that inform like the specifics of my character. Whenever I played Blades in the Dark, like it is always just about like what role in the party do I want to have, and then I'll let every other choice flow from that, as opposed to going and saying, I want to play a woman from Ghana who moved to Duskfall to become a doctor.
And she got stuck in the Dust Bowl.
Yep. She can't leave the lightning whales. I don't remember anything about the world building of Blades in the Dark.
I was gonna say, you were like, every time I play Blades in the Dark, I do this. I was like, do you play Blades in the Dark frequently?
I played in 4 games of Blades in the Dark.
Oh, that's more than I thought.
I all of them petered out relatively quickly as part of. I played one on a stream. I don't think you can see it anymore.
Bad.
Well,
I just remember you have a blood vendetta. That's why I associate between you and Blades in the Dark.
I do. But yeah, in those playbook style games, I think very often it's not like I come in knowing I want to play a character like this, whereas like the advice that many people give for making your first Dungeons and Dragons character is saying, oh, what's a character like I want to be Sherlock Holmes, and how can I translate that into the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons?
Well, I was going to say, I think of D&D and similar games as to borrow a phrase from Tumblr, as the Blorbo games.
Yeah.
Where like you come up with the idea of a fun little guy that you want to be, and then you like generate that, whether it's an original idea or not, as opposed to, again, for me, playbook style games, character creation starts by being like, okay, let me look at these playbooks and decide which of them, and deciding whether I want to play the game actually probably includes looking at the playbooks and being like, okay, is there one of these that like I feel I'm down with? Or, versus the life path or randomization ones where it's like character creation is sort of, or to differing degrees, like out of my hands. Mm-hmm. Like it's a process I go through rather than a creative thing I generate.
Well, but I think the thing that like sort of I keep coming back to when I think about D&D and like your first D&D character and how inevitably it is something that is deeply close to who you are in ways that are oftentimes uncomfortable, right? And like the classic second D&D character is the Jester Lavore. I'm just going to be a little chaos agent. I have been unleashed now. Now that I no longer find myself working through my sort of like unknowingly working through trauma that I didn't realize I had in my first character. But I think that's actually a very interesting thing to think about. Like, I don't think that happens so much, or at least wouldn't happen so accidentally in a playbook style character creation model, right? Because you are choosing your arc. Versus a game where you do not have an arc that you're choosing, you're just simply going, I'm gonna Blorbo this, right? And like that, the experience is learning. Is it? I don't know. What am I making sense?
But I'm not sure I agree. Like,
I definitely chose the spooky witch archetype because like felt right, like.
Yeah. Well, but you chose it.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
right?
I wasn't accidentally. Yeah, I wasn't like, I don't know.
It wasn't subconscious. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying, right? The conscious versus the subconscious, and that I think is actually a very interesting thing too. Is like my first D&D character was absolutely a character that I was like, oh gosh, I look back on it and I go, I was working through some things, whether I knew it or not, but like. I figured out that I was working through some things by playing the character. And I still wanted to keep playing the game because I was like, oh, that's so powerful. How can I do this with intentionality?
Yeah,
right?
Well, and I think the degree to which one can make a self-insert, which is kind of what we're talking about, whether consciously or subconsciously, I think some games I think want to afford you the opportunity to feel like you are a heroic adventurer who has an intact family or
that's not a D&D character. What? No. Nobody has an intact family.
Almost every D&D character I've ever played, intact family, except for famously the one in our last home game where his parents got killed by demons. Anyway,
sure did.
But like I think some games are interested in affording a player experience that is like one of deep intimate tie to your character, and then others I think are interested in affording an experience where you either the character is completely immaterial or you are sort of signing up for a really specific um narrative experience that is tied to a really specific relational and emotional journey. That you can't sort of predetermine what it's going to be, because the game does a lot of that lifting for you, which you might like or you might hate. Like, I think a lot of people bounce off of belonging outside belonging games because they are so relational, and you are you have very little say about the given circumstances of what you're signing on to.
And I was going to say, and whether you bounce off of that maybe also depends on what you're dealing with. I have a friend who it's become sort of a joke or a meme in our friend group about how every time she plays a game with a playbook, it's like, all right, where's the character who's like, where's the playbook that's like, I don't fit in here.
Yeah, because there's always one.
Because there's often one. You know, when we played Masks, she was the outsider, I think is what it's called, the one that's like Starfire. When we played Wanderhome, she was the exile. You know, this is a person who was not born in the U.S. and lives here full time now, and like, I don't think that's entirely a coincidence, right?
But I think I don't know that that's necessarily unique to playbook style, right?
No, not at all. What I'm saying is like, when the game, how much that like cathartic thing is possible depends on what the game is interested in. Is like, is there a playbook that lets you play with this thing that,
or at the very least, because a playbook style game is built to accommodate that story and play out that story, I think it is guaranteed that is the experience that you will have, as opposed to like in D&D, if you wanted to like play around with that, it is like up to the DM and your group.
You got to do that.
Right. And like, it's limited to I don't know that I'm a non-binary person, but I'm playing a tiefling. Yeah. Right. Like, which doesn't necessarily have any impact on the story. It's just sort of like how you see yourself. That makes a lot of sense. And that's kind of what I was saying a little bit too, relative to intentionality, right? But yeah, no, I agree. I think that's an interesting thing. Ultimately, character creation. But I think I'd like to like sort of circle back to this is all circling back to my initial sort of thought about Avatar, right? And ultimately, a game's the expectations that a game sets for a player to experience their player character as an avatar of themselves versus that they care about, right? Versus a meat grinder character that they're just totally okay with throwing to the meat grinder because you're there to explore the dungeon, not to have your character survive exploring the dungeon, right? You're there to player are there to get to the bottom of the dungeon, however you can, with whatever character you can, and it's bonus points if your like original character gets there. But either way, you're going.
Well, it's interesting though that in Dungeon Crawl Classics, like the design, like it does say like you will form a bond with whoever makes it through that first dungeon and gets to get their character class. And I can't say whether that's true or not. I would maybe believe it.
I mean, over the course of, once you've played a character for a long time, I feel more bonded to them than when I can do all the like dreaming and scheming of a little Blorbo that I want, but that's different from like having played it for 20 sessions.
Yes. Well, I think the perhaps the best example of this, and this is not a TTRPG, but it's the video game Journey, right? The classic game, at this point it's a classic game, where you play as a super limited character that does not have much personality. It merely is a cloaked figure running through the desert, and it can make a sound, and it can jump and glide, and it can glide and as you go, you can mechanically glide for longer periods of time. And it's like a linear game system. It's a linear track. You go from beginning to end. It's very much like Hero's Journey Life Path. You're going to die at the end metaphorically. Like it's going to happen. But the thing that makes the game so spectacular is how simple that is. And then the actual twist of the game is that somewhere around stage 2, you are randomly assigned another live player to be in the same space as you. And you either you go through that experience together or you leave each other behind. And the carrot at the end is, should you go through that entire experience together, then you are gifted with the screen name of the person who you played with, right? And like, it is so simple, but it's such a distillation of connection, right? But it is very much like, there is no character creation. You are Avatar. It is Avatar of you. And then you have another person and you are putting emotion onto their behavior. You are trying to decipher what they are because you're given little else to do. And what a thrill it is to finish the game with another person. And when they stop moving, you wait. You know what I mean? Like, that is a fascinating sort of like psychological experience. That is a game that is like, you will develop connection, right? Versus, and it does it, versus, because that's all that it does, versus what you're talking about with this like meat grinder thing, with where it's like, you will care about this character because this was the one that lived, and it's like,
well, I wonder
up to you.
If the sort of spectrum that we've identified in terms of thinking about like character as player avatar is a spectrum of like intended identification with your character. Because I think a playbook style game wants you to or maybe it's not about identification, but like I think it is an invitation for you as the player to experience the same emotional journey.
Yes. And it assumes an interest in that.
And because it assumes that you are buying into that, and it assumes that you will experience that same journey and that that's the desired outcome. Whereas I think a Lego brick game assumes some degree of identification with, or some degree of like there's an openness to like, I will be experiencing the same thing that my character is emotionally and socially. And then I think it scopes back out towards like, I am using and manipulating this character to interact with this world, but the experience is my experience. It's not filtered through a character.
I'm trying to figure out I feel like it's not quite identification that we're circling around.
Yeah.
It's more like it's a question of like of like ownership almost, which is distinct from identification. But
it's not, identification is wrong.
But like in a playbook game, it's like, are you interested in like a playbook game is like, I have an experience to offer you. Do you want it? Yes or no?
Yeah.
And then, the Lego bricks are all trying to be like, we have so many things for you to play with to create your own thing.
Here's ways to be.
Build your own experience.
Yeah, curate your own experience. And then the life paths and the randomization ones are in sort of different but related ways about like submitting yourself to like I will take what I am given, which will not be a specific thing in the way that a playbook is. Yeah. But like, I will make of this like thing I've been handed something that I care about.
Yes.
Well, then there are some games. Yes, that is it. And I hate to throw. There's like maybe a fifth bucket, even of games where you're just a person, like Brindlewood Bay.
Well, Brindlewood Bay is still playbooks. I was going to say the bucket we left out here that I think is really secretly the same bucket as Lego bricks, but doesn't look like it, is skills games. Where like but I would argue those are just, I'm thinking of like Shadowrun,
but there's
no like classes and so on, but you just put points in the billion fucking skills. I would argue that functionally the skills are just Lego bricks.
Brindlewood Bay is not playbook style. The only distinguishing feature of Brindlewood Bay is your special move.
Oh, really? I forgot that.
Are not playbooks.
Oh, okay. I'm misremembering then.
They do, however, Yeah, but they try to like they give you examples. They want you to be like a certain kind of this person, right? There is sort of, and they do have stats that you go into.
It's just not the same as a playbook, I would say.
No, it's not. It's not the same as a playbook at all. No. I would say Brindle of Bay is closer to Lego Brick. Speaking frankly, as Eddie Rue, I did not anticipate going into that. We went through character creation of that, and I was not the spiritual person. And I turned my character into the spiritual. I was the redundancy. Ben and I played characters. There were 4 stats in that game. We had originally 5 players. And each of us had one stat that was better than the other. And Ben and I both played characters that were very high charisma. And like when we lost...
Halle.
Who was supposed to play? Halle. Halle couldn't actually play the game after we created the characters. We were down a spirituality character, and Eddie Rue became that over the course of the game. And a playbook style would not have allowed that.
Mm-hmm.
That is definitely like I use character advancement to alter the path of my character to give us mechanical advantage. But
because Chris is a power gamer.
Yeah, deeply. But also it was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think this is all very interesting.
Yeah. Well, may we all start the game naked and stupid.
Whistling, not a skill.
That is not a skill.
Whistling isn't a skill. And if you can't do it, what does that make you?
Well, I can't whistle, so I guess I can't survive in the Middle Ages.
That's true. That's true.
I feel that this is a lovely place for us to leave off. Thank you very much, Chris, for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you, listeners, for joining us. Thank you for listening to Dungeons and Drama Nerds. Stay tuned for more of our Stillfleet campaign, which is coming soon to your podcatcher of choice.
Woo!
Dungeons and Drama Nerds is produced by Percival Hornak and Nicholas Orvis and co-produced, mixed, and edited by Ben Ferber. Our game of Wythe Marschall's Stillfleet features Christopher Diercksen as Geshra Veedle, Kory Flores as Peanut, Mieko Gavia as Kiranis, John Johnson as Private Taps, special guest Wythe Marschall as Charik Shadams, and was GM'd by Ben Ferber. If you'd like to help us continue exploring the intersections of theater and tabletop role-playing games, consider leaving us a review on your podcast app of choice or supporting us on Patreon, which gets you access to our patron-only bonus content, including our patron-exclusive show, Skit Bash. You can find us at patreon.com/Dungeons and Drama Nerds. You can find our social media, website, and cast bios at the link tree in our show notes. Our core ensemble members are Todd Backus, Jovane Caamano, Anthony Sertel Dean, Christopher Diercksen, Ben Ferber, Kory Flores, Mieko Gavia, Tess Huth, Romana Isabella, John Johnson, CJ Linton, C. Meaks Meaker, Leo Mock, Phan, and Tristan B. Willis. Tune in next week for another exciting episode.